Well, that's great to hear. We wouldn't want to be existing in a marketplace where vendors were, being forced into you purchasing them for that. So I'm glad to hear that. So let's get into a little bit about what the requirements are. You mentioned one right away, which is basic security, scanning and patching. That vulnerability management is an incredibly important piece of any security policy. And largely in my career, those names that kind of get associated with that would be a Qualys, a Tenable, Rapid7. They all have expanded, what they do for some time. Curious from your perspective, any experience with these names as vulnerability management tools? Any feedback on how they're doing, how they're staying up with the times?
Well, sure. And I think the three you mentioned are the three that I'm also very familiar with from a leader perspective. And I'm bearing in mind too that the vulnerability management scanning is helpful, of course, in identifying where your risk reside, and
right.
have you patched, have you addressed the CVEs that have been released. Those vendors are for better or for worse not helping with the application of the specific patches. So that's sort of your audit control, so to speak. So a system on the front end of some kind that is used to apply the patches, and then those vendors that you mentioned can be used to verify and validate that the systems are no longer vulnerable. And one of the prerequisites really is to have a good inventory of all of your assets, both devices as well as software. Often we'll see a new vulnerability that's identified, and then it'll get published in various places, and the question inevitably is, are we vulnerable? How many, how big a risk is this? How many systems are impacted? And so being able to answer that question quickly is important. Tenable, Qualys, Rapid7 can be helpful in identifying how big the problem is.
I do appreciate that distinction about, just the audit control and knowing where your assets are versus actually patching them. Maybe you could just educate me, what type of, software or system would you have in tandem to make sure the patches were actually being applied?
Well, two of the leaders that in patch management, Microsoft with Intune, and then IBM with BigFix.
Right. What did Microsoft used to be? And I remember going back to my early days of the career. What was it called? Patch Tuesdays, I believe.
We still have Patch Tuesdays.
Yep. So it's still coming out every Tuesday. You gotta really appreciate what Microsoft has been doing in security. I'm switching to that now. It's when I first started my career at Microsoft, to be quite honest, was just the software operating system, and they've taken that foothold and some would say stranglehold, but they've certainly done an amazing job with R&D and acquisition and building out their security side. And maybe, Bruce, I'm just going to ask you as a CISO, when you think of Microsoft and security, what are your first thoughts reputationally and effectively?
Yeah, so I really concur wholeheartely with with your thought on that. When I first started, Microsoft was largely an operating system and browser, and today we look at Microsoft as a strategic partner around information security. The portfolio is certainly growing, and the products, at least those that I'm familiar with and have implemented, they work, and they work very well.
Yeah, and what we're seeing is most enterprises have that 365 license of some level, and then when they see what Microsoft can offer, and then they do the price comparison, they'll say, okay, I'll bump up to an E5 because it's going to get me Azure Sentinel. It's going to get me Defender across my entire enterprise. From you and your peers' perspective, is that sort of the roadmap you're seeing with Microsoft and security?
Yeah, I mean that's the initial. That certainly is the initial entry point. Is the the O365 property. I would say that the licensing models and the names can definitely get confusing.
Yeah.
Defender covers a whole suite of different things, and so does Intune. Uh, and I and I do I do think that there are pieces of that, including Sentinel, Defender, Intune, that are address core issues, and moreover, it's not just addressing Microsoft-centric systems. You can use a lot of these tools, Defender, Intune, on non-Microsoft systems. So you can patch something that is not not Windows, and you can manage a device that's not just Windows as well.
I always like to say, you guys are the experts. I'm just the researcher. No one really wants to hear me talk. So I would love if you would tell me what kind of trends are happening for you and your CISO peers that I should be researching. What kind of questions and topics did I not ask today that I should be?
I think you've covered most all the topics and trends that that I've been focused on. I guess I would suggest going a little bit going a little bit deeper on behavior-based analysis to understand where that's going and how that works with traditional SIMs, and as well as the cloud-based SIMs. Also, there's often pressure to move toward a managed security solution versus for monitoring, and I think that there certainly are some concerns with that, and there absolutely is a requirement to know your assets and have a categorization of where the data resides in place, before trying to accomplish or address something like that. You didn't touch really at all on asset management, and I think that's a huge area for improvement and focus. And what I mean by that is not just the devices, but also where the data resides on the devices, what applications are where, how they're categorized. From this is a financial system, this one is a clinical system, so that you can not only report back out and address do incident response on the highest priority systems and data first, but also so that you can measure risk across those various categories, and then focus your spend and your efforts in the highest risk, highest priority areas.
That's got a lot for me to work with. I greatly appreciate it. Just for my own education, when you talk about actually enacting that asset management for you, or you tell your team to go do it and say, give me an inventory, what do we have and where is it and how is it categorized? What do you use to do that? Are there certain providers or partners out in the marketplace that you feel do a good job with that I should be aware of?
Well, certainly ServiceNow is a player in that space, and really to me that's a good place for that information to reside, because it has so many other benefits within your core ticketing system to be able to identify things like hey, I've had 10% failure on this particular type of device in the first 90 days after purchase, so that's something I need to look at. There's a lot of other actionable data that you can pull out of that. But as far as sources, I'm not sure I can identify other vendors, but looking at DHCP, looking at DNS,
Sure.
looking at scans from the vulnerability, enterprise vulnerability like a Tenable, Rapid7, Qualys, all of those are all those are good sources for identifying that something exists and collecting some amount of data about what it is and what's running on it. So being able to kind of blend all of those together to come back with a view of the inventory, and that's device inventory. We also need to make sure that we're tracking software inventory as well. And when we get into that, what pieces of hardware make up that ecosystem? So a particular enterprise solution, like let's say Epic, it may consist of dozens of servers and certain specific network equipment that's used to get to those servers, and then a whole set of workstations. So in order for that, I think I mentioned ecosystem, to be functional, we have to look at that, that whole set of systems, and then we also can measure risk across that